Hey everyone, welcome to our Billings Church of Christ Facebook class. Once you get here, go ahead and comment. I want to know who all's out there in the world, so go ahead and introduce yourself. Let us know you're here. I have a message that popped up that says Larry and Nancy Hibble, Renee Prinky, and I'm guessing Dwayne, Richard, and Leanne Patton are there as well. We've got Holly King, Eric Peterson, and then my phone says two others. So I would like to welcome the two others who are not specifically named. If you want to check in and say you're here, we'd love to say hello. We've got the Kingses. We have a Jerry Ford. We have a Jerry Bowers. We have a Judy Hostetter also joining us via the internets, the live web stream we have going on here. We've got Brian Lair joining us as well. Brian, glad to have you with us tonight. Yeah, go ahead and make sure you check in. Be good to know who we are here. And look at that. Jerry Cycle is helping us out by giving us the phonetic spelling of her name. Jerry, thank you so much for helping those of us who have difficulties getting names correct. We have Carrie Blazina joining us as well from across town on the other side of, well, not the tracks, on the other side of Lewis. Carrie Blazina, glad to have you with us as well. Make sure you go ahead and check in. Be good to know who all's joining us, and we'll get started in a few more seconds. Just as folks jump in, say hello. We're thankful to have everyone with us. It's good to know that even though I'm talking to a telephone, that I know that there's people out there on the other end of the world listening and participating. Hi to Doreen. Doreen Blacketer is with us live from another side of town. We have Todd Loomis. Todd, glad to have you here. We have Gay Gobin Callgrove. Gay and family, good to have all of you with us as well. What's really interesting is I've had a couple of people like Todd who say hello, and then I get a message that Todd is watching. We have the Traps family here. We have Jeff and Cindy joining us via a non-commentable format, and they get to send texts in. Also, if you are watching and you're not on Facebook and you want to leave comments, you can text my phone number and we'll get that as well. We have Bruce Blacketer. We have Cindy Pavey joining us here tonight. So thankful and glad to have everyone with us. I think we'll go ahead and get started. And we've got several things we're going to talk about tonight and touch base on, and I'm looking forward to your comments. So, you may need to do some finger stretches so you can type whatever you need to do to just get ready to make sure that you're participating by sharing your thoughts and sharing your comments. We do want this to be an interactive class. If I'm the only one talking, by the end of the day, then this class will be an absolute failure. But if you guys are kicking in with your ideas and thoughts, we're going to have a class that I think is beneficial for everyone. And we've got Steve Krogstad joining us as well. Thankful to have Steve with us. So we are in, really, it's the second class of a series called Psalm 23 and the Turmoil of 2020, and we kind of introduced this idea of getting into Psalm 23. And what we're going to do tonight is we are going to look at the very first verse. So we're going to be taking a very slow journey through Psalm 23. Mona, glad to have you with us. It's a blessing to see you as a part of the class tonight. I'm going to tell you a story about a guy named Shane Hips. Shane used to describe his work as an advertising account planner. So Shane used to work for an advertising company, and he would get all sorts of different contracts, and it was his job to help advertise for that company. But several years later, Shane changed careers, and as he looked back on his career, he began to describe his career in advertising using some different language and different terms. He says now, in retrospect, he was a consumer anthropologist, and that his job was to study people in order to get to know their trigger points so that they would then buy more stuff. So when Shane would come in, and if he would have a focus group, or as he would meet with people and talk about what they were witnessing either in the world or through a product. He was wanting to know about their trigger points. And because of that, as he looks back, he said that he would seek to unearth private exploitable data from people's lives. So I have come up with a wonderful little illustration here. I know the whole thing can't be seen, but it doesn't need to be seen. But he said in his conversations with people, I'm trying to get this set here. Everything's opposite. Okay, so in the opposite world, you go here, and there we go. Okay. As a consumer anthropologist, what he would look for is exploitable data. And so that would be things like people feel unattractive, or they feel powerless, or they feel insignificant. And as Shane Hipps is getting to know people in his advertising thing, that's really important for him to know, because what he's going to then seek to do as an advertiser is he's going to seek to then talk about how a product will be able to satisfy those things that he can exploit in people. So again, as he gets to know you, he doesn't really want to get to know you. He wants to get to know those trigger points. He wants to find that data that he can exploit to use for his benefit. And so in this particular instance, he was talking about, he was being a sales, he was promoting Porsche. And so then Porsche is now going to somehow solve the problem of being unattractive or feeling powerless or feeling insignificant. And so Shane's job was to come up with an advertisement that would then make you feel like all of these problems would be solved by Porsche. Here's the problem. And for those of you who are in class this morning, you realize, okay, maybe this is touching a little bit on that. He began to realize that what he was doing, he came to find that he was promoting what he calls a counterfeit gospel. So he thought he was doing advertising, but he comes to say, you know what, I'm really not doing advertising. In doing this, I am promoting a counterfeit gospel. So I want us to talk a little bit more about why do you think Hipps would say, in the process of doing advertising, looking for exploitable data, why would Hipps say he was promoting a counterfeit gospel? So if you have any thoughts or ideas about that, go ahead and use your comment feature. Leave a comment about why somebody in advertising could look back at what they're doing and saying, you know, really all I was doing was exploiting or was promoting a counterfeit gospel. In what ways could this form of advertising being that? As you're leaving your comments, I do want to welcome Tammy Loomis here is with us, Melinda Muir, we have Donna Sannon, we have Karen Hillary. Glad to have all of you guys here with us. Promoting a counterfeit gospel. Okay, Bruce mentions one of the reasons is because the motives that we're touching on are self-serving, and that relates to this being a counterfeit gospel. Any other thoughts or ideas as to why one might think, as they're looking for these things to exploit, as they're pointing to a product to satisfy them, why he might feel like he was producing a counterfeit gospel? We'll give a few more seconds to see if anybody else has any thoughts on this. Brian Lair mentions to knowingly taking advantage of people's weaknesses. Dorian says promoting things that are only fulfilling for a short while, that there's nothing external or internal, or eternal. Sorry, that there's nothing eternal or internal. Lori mentions owning a car doesn't change your looks. I would beg to differ. I do drive a 2009 Honda Odyssey, and people have commented about how I look so much better now that I drive that vehicle. So it might not be true for everyone, but certainly it works for some people. We realize that advertising kind of have these promises that it often can't satisfy. Cindy Pavey mentions, let me get back here, it promotes finding our worth in something other than Christ. That it's saying here, there's some emptiness here, and we're going to find something apart from Christ to fill it. Jerry Bowers mentions that it's temporary satisfaction and it will not last. That if these are enduring or eternal problems and we're going to throw a product at it, the solution is going to come up far short. Jerry Cycle mentions selling a product that would satisfy for a short time, but it would never be a cure-all. And so it doesn't really fully address this sort of emptiness there. And that's really is, I mean, I think you guys have gotten to the core of what his concern was saying that how does one deal with these exploitable data, these trigger points, things like feeling insignificant or feeling unattractive or feeling powerless, that really the solution for those things is Christ. And to offer something as a substitute is a false gospel, saying this is going to actually take care of it. And so I think that we're living in an age of excessive lack. Now watch this. I have really upped my presentation game here. I had a sticky note ready to go. And so now, boom. This exploitable data is like a pool of excessive lack. We as a culture seem to be having excessive experiences of what we are lacking, of what is missing, of what is absent in our lives. Now, I guess I could ask the question, do you agree or disagree that people are experiencing a lot of lack? But I'm going to go ahead and just move forward with that assumption. Assuming that to be true, why do you think people are experiencing so much lack today? So they're experiencing emptiness or a hole, or they're somehow just, it never feels like enough. So what might be some things specific to where we are as a culture that might contribute to the reason why people are experiencing so much emptiness, that they feel like so much is missing or so much is lacking in their lives? So go ahead and use your comment feature. And what do you think are some of the things, and they could be things, that have been around forever, but I guess I'm thinking specifically about some things that might be unique in 2020, so not necessarily COVID related, but unique to us right now that contributes to this feeling of lack. Do want to welcome Rhonda and JT who have joined us. Okay, so Melinda here mentions if a person is lacking work, that they could feel this sense of emptiness or something that's missing. Holly King mentions that when you lean on yourself, you're gonna find an empty reservoir there. Brian talks about tired of always talking about and about hearing the same things, that there can be this fatigue that leads to this idea, this concept, or this sense of lack. What things do we think are continuing to contribute to the fact that a lot of people right now are experiencing a sense of emptiness or of not enough or of lacking? Eric Peterson mentions being in isolation and how that isolation can contribute to us feeling this way. Yeah, Karen Hillary mentioned sometimes forgetting to pray, kind of missing out on that part of our spiritual lives. Let me scan up here for just a minute, Jerry. Cycle mentions we sometimes value people for their social worth to us. Mary Gaddy, a lack of, it just disappeared. Let me see, Mary, if I can pull that back up here. A lack of grounding and fear-mongering. And so we don't really have a base, and so there's just always this constant sense of more, this present sense of fear of kind of missing out, a fear of not being in the right place. So Bruce had mentioned, okay, sorry, I think I read the comments in the wrong spot here, so let me get back here. Jerry Cycle says, because of the constant changing times, so keeping up with the Joneses. Bruce was the one who had mentioned sometimes we sometimes value people for their social worth to us rather than kind of forming more legitimate connections. Jerry Bowers, God is not always their shepherd, where they will find nothing to lack. Dorian Blacker, they fill their God hole with things instead of God. Here's a few things that ended up on my list. I think that we live in a day and age where it is easier than ever to compare what our lives look like in conjunction with other people's lives. Okay. So ironically, Eric, as you mentioned, we are isolated, and the reality is we're isolated, and even in our isolation, though, we have a better look into what other people's lives are really like. So if you think about the number of Zoom conference calls people are having right now, you're getting a window into people's houses that otherwise they might have never seen. So right now I'm doing this class from my office. Some of you have been in my office and some of you haven't. You're getting to see something in my life in a more visceral or in a more detailed way than you otherwise might be. Now, you may think, if you can see out of the corner of your eye right here, that's a painting by Vincent van Gogh. And I'm sure somebody out there is wondering, is that an authentic Van Gogh? Does Craig have in his office a picture worth millions or billions of dollars? And if Craig does, then all of a sudden you're going to start to feel what? You're jealous. You're jealous because Craig clearly has an authentic image by Vincent van Gogh. And so you now have an opportunity to compare. And if you say, well, how come Craig has that really nice stuff? Then that makes you then begin to feel like, well, how come I don't have an authentic Vincent van Gogh in my house? So we have these windows of lives. We have this ease of comparison. We have the ability to offer filtered versions of ourselves. So I can post on Facebook or on any sort of social media site, and I can present to you exactly everything I want to present to you. You know, my kids, for example, they always just say the cutest and sweetest things. And, you know, even though my kid's 1 year old, you know, I'm not changing diapers over here. I'm not doing any of that sort of thing. Like all the messy things of life, you know, we don't deal with. So when we give edited or filtered kind of parts of ourselves and we start to look at each other and think, man, I must be missing something because that person over there seems to be so much better off, or seems to be so much happier, or their kids are so much better, or they're so much better looking, or they drive nicer cars, or they have nicer things. I mean, all of these things contribute to the sense of, man, I must be missing something. Yeah, Bruce mentions that you can look at Zillow and you can know what your possessions are worth. You know, used to be a day and time you'd go into someone's house and you're like, man, this is a really nice house. I wonder how much it cost. What's the likelihood you're going to ask how much it costs? Zero. Now, after you leave the house, if you're so inclined, you can get onto Zillow and you can get an estimate of what that person's house looks like. Now, as I say that, somebody's going to say, Craig, you've always been able to go to the county clerk and pull property tax records. That's true. We might be curious to know. We might not go that much work to it. I think there's something to be said for new products being released yearly, you know, every 6 months. You know, I mean, every time I start my phone, there's an update, right? There's something new. And if I bought a phone 2 years ago, somebody might say, hey, Craig, why do you have such an old phone? That thing is 2 years old. That's probably the same phone that Fred Flintstone used to use. And so now I feel like, oh, I need to upgrade because, you know, maybe 9 megapixels for a camera used to be good back in the day, but now everyone's got 12 or 13 or 14. And so with all this new technology, it increases the sense of, man, I've got to keep up. I'm missing out on something. So there was three sociologists, I think out of the University of Pittsburgh, did a study, and they wrote a paper called Social Comparison, Social Media, and Self-Esteem. Anybody want to guess what happens the more time people spend on social media, what happens to their self-esteem? Would you guess that people's self-esteem tends to go up as they spend time on social media, or would you guess that it tends to go down? What these researchers found out is that people experience a lower sense of self-esteem the more time they spend on networking sites. And they say the reason is because of this exposure to upward social comparison. You look at how great everyone else's life is, and all of a sudden you're aware of all of the ways something is missing. So this is, again, we're talking about excessive lack. We are experiencing more and more ways where we don't have, where we're experiencing missing out, not having as much as what we think everyone else in the world has. There's a story about a 19-year-old girl from Australia. Her name was Essena O'Neill. Is a model who had over 600,000 followers on Instagram. So just to put that in perspective, if she were to do a placed advertisement for a company, she's going to take a picture, put it on Instagram. They would pay her $2,000 just to have a single picture taken with a product. So a pretty well-recognized person. But on October 27th, 2015, she completely quit Instagram. And she wrote an article about why she chose to do that. And she said that she didn't like who she was becoming. She'd put up her post, and then she would get 17,000 likes, which maybe for most of us, we'd say, wow, 17,000 likes. I think once I got 7 likes on something that I posted. But she said, I would never be satisfied with 17,000 likes because then someone else would get 20,000 or 25,000 likes. And so she felt like no matter what she did, that she was always somehow inferior or inadequate, that something was lacking or missing. She said she'd put up posts and she'd have pictures of herself, but then she'd look at these other girls and she would say they have a nicer nose, or they have a nicer cheek line, or any of these sort of things. And so eventually she quit Instagram simply because she felt like by being on social media, for her, it just exemplified all of the lack that she was experiencing in life. And so what I want us to do is I want us to begin to talk about how biblically we can address this experience of lack. Now, we shouldn't be surprised that our answer is going to come out of Psalm 23 because right now we're studying Psalm 23. But I want to read Psalm 23, verse 1, and I'm going to read it in 3 different translations. Very short, but also I think very powerful. New Revised Standard Version. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. New International Version. The Lord is my shepherd, I lack nothing. The Message. God is my shepherd, I don't need a thing. Now, Psalm 23 follows a very, very common kind of biblical formula or a biblical model, which before there's any sort of a call to do something or a call to respond in any sort of a way, there's a beginning explanation about who God is and what God has done. Why in the Bible is it so important that as we begin to look at any sort of situations we deal with or issues that we might encounter, why do we begin with God? So go ahead and use your comment feature and just share why you think it is that it's so common that the Bible begins with God before it gets to us. You can see examples of this, say like Genesis 1, in the beginning, God. So we begin the story of history. It doesn't begin with man. It doesn't begin with man's problem. It begins with who God is. You can look at a book in the Bible like Ephesians, and it begins by talking about all that God has done in the first 3 chapters. Beginning in Ephesians 4, it begins to say, now here's how we're going to live in response to that. But why do you think it's important biblically that there is this pattern? We first talk about it and we establish who God is. We establish what God has done. Why is that an important kind of pattern or format for us to follow? Because I would say for us as people, say maybe specific for me as a preacher, there's always the temptation to say, okay, let's skip the who God is and let's just get to what you need to do in response. And I think that what we begin to realize is that our response is based on who he is. And so unless we have a really, really good firm foundation of who he is and what he's done, our response can't have any context. It can't have any sort of, we have no means to know whether it's an appropriate response or not a appropriate response. So another translation, this is a guy named Kohler. He translates Psalm 23:1 saying, so long as the Lord is my shepherd, I suffer no lack. Let me say it again. So long as the Lord is my shepherd, I suffer no lack. So everything here is built on the foundation, just as Jerry Bowers mentions, he is the source of everything. Everything is built on the foundation of who God is. If we get that piece right, our response seems far more natural. And if we get that piece wrong, no matter how hard we try, our response is going to be unnatural. And so we begin with this foundation about who God is, but what God has done. So in Psalm 23, as it's addressing the lack that we experience, the insufficiency, the inadequacy, these things that we experience, it begins by talking about who God is. And God in Psalm 23 uses the metaphor of the Lord is my shepherd. And as we talk about a metaphor, we are saying that there are certain ways that God is like this, and there are also certain ways that God is not like this. So God is not an exact representation of a shepherd, but as you look at a shepherd, you're going to get a picture of what God looks like. Yeah, and I think that Eric Peterson mentions it enables us to put issues in proper perspective. If we begin with that God piece and we move into what we're experiencing, Everything's framed appropriately. Jerry Cycle mentions that David was acknowledging that the Lord is his shepherd king. Yeah, there is in this acknowledgement of shepherd, there's both metaphor and there is also a royal title. A lot of other nations, the Egyptians, the Assyrians would call their kings shepherds, and so there is this title that is associated with this concept of being a shepherd. Todd mentions all direction requires a reference point. Yeah, that wherever we go, whatever we do, it needs to have this kind of firm foundation, a firm starting point that is there, it's acknowledged and recognized. What do you think is being communicated by the idea that God is our shepherd? So what would be some of the things that we should think about or recognize or feel or experience in response to the fact that the Lord is my shepherd? What ideas, what concepts, what feelings should be surface? I guess that's the word, surface. I don't know why it took me so long to get there. Why is it a comfort that God is my shepherd? So go ahead and use your comment feature and go ahead and share. What do you think are some of the things that are being communicated by the idea, by the metaphor of God being our shepherd? What are we being reminded of? What are we being taught? Dorian mentions that he leads, that he protects, that he feeds. Rhonda mentioning that he is the protector and that he is the caretaker. We have Brian also mentioning this concept of protection. I'm going to check things off as we get them here and see where we get with this. That Jerry Bowers mentions he cares for me and he guides me in safety. Holly King mentioning that he is our protector. Todd, that he is a caregiver. Jerry Cycle is mentioning John 10:11, where we come to find that Jesus is indeed the good shepherd. What other ideas or notions are communicated, do you think, in this idea that the Lord is my shepherd? We have protection, we have guidance. Let me see here. We've got a comment from Mary. Acquiescence, relief, hope, and understanding that his will is important, not mine. So there is this recognition in God that he is doing things that we cannot do, that he has a will, that he is working out a purpose. Tammy Loomis mentions looking out for our safety. So there is this concept of God's awareness, God's protection, God's provision through all of that. I had 5 things on my list, and we caught 4 of the 5 on my list. The first is protection. As sheep would be in these situations, they would, if they were attacked by a lion or by a bear. So Cindy Trapp says he corrects. And then Cindy wrote, breaks my leg. And I don't know, Cindy, if I'm misreading something there, but he corrects, breaks my leg. That's Cindy Trapp's comment. So we have this protection. We have provision. The shepherd's job is as the sheep eat the grass in this location, it's the shepherd's job to find another place, another watering hole, because the sheep, they're going to consume the grass faster than it's going to grow in a said area. So if they just keep staying there, they're not going to have what's needed. And so there is this concept of provision. Associated with that is guidance. The shepherd will know where to go, what are the places that they should be moving along. And there is this care. The shepherd will do what is necessary to care for, to watch over the sheep. The other element that I had is presence. The nice thing about a shepherd is a roving person, not a stationary person. And so wherever the sheep go, they know that the shepherd is going to accompany them along the way. Cindy Trapp mentions that if he needs to break my leg to keep me safe, he will. Yeah, that there is a recognition that the extremes to which God will go to protect us and to ensure that as his flock that we are taken care of. Jerry Bowers mentions that one must be one of his sheep to benefit from his shepherding. And I think that we are going to get to that piece, Jerry, this recognition of, okay, so how do we respond to the shepherding of God? This metaphor of shepherd, I say this now, but there's an earlier reference. I was going to say, it kind of begins, it really makes its mark, I will say, in the wilderness wanderings. There's a reference, I believe, in Genesis 24:29 to God being a shepherd. Maybe somebody with a search feature can track down that exact reference in Genesis. But I want us to look at the wilderness wanderings. And so we're going to just look at a few texts that show kind of the shepherding nature of God as it begins to surface in the wilderness wanderings. Exodus 15:13. In your steadfast love, you led the people whom you redeemed. You guided them by your strength to your holy abode. Exodus 15:17. Maybe you're thinking I'm preaching through Proverbs, huh? Exodus 15:17. You brought them in and planted them on the mountain of your possession, the place, O Lord, that you made your abode, the sanctuary, O Lord, that your hands have established. So there is this notion in the wilderness wanderings that God is leading the people along the way, that the people are like sheep and God is the shepherd who is guiding them there. We'll see this most clearly as it relates to Psalm 23 and Deuteronomy 2:7. Surely the Lord your God has blessed you in all your undertakings. He knows you're going through this great wilderness. These 40 years the Lord your God has been with you, and you have lacked nothing. And so what happens in the wilderness is there is all this lack, there's all this absence, there is not enough, and yet there's a recognition that with God's presence, God has always been with them, and when God was with them, they did not lack anything. Now, we won't go there yet. There's a couple of Proverbs that then also kind of continue this notion as they look back at the wilderness wanderings. So Psalm 78, verse 52 and following. Then he led out his people like sheep and guided them in the wilderness like a flock. He led them in safety so that they were not afraid. But the sea overwhelmed their enemies, and he brought them to his holy hill, to the mountain that his right hand had won. He drove out nations before them. He apportioned them for a possession and settled the tribes of Israel in their tents. Psalm 95:7. For he is our God, and we are the people of his pasture, the sheep of his hand. Oh, that today you would listen to his voice. So the next question I want you to use your comment feature and just share a response to this is, why would the shepherd metaphor be especially important in the wilderness? What is it about the situations that are uncertain, where there is more question marks? Why in these situations is the shepherd metaphor maybe more significant or more meaningful in situations that are uncertain, where there is turmoil? So go ahead and use your comment feature and just talk about why you think that might be. Rhonda mentions that the shepherd carries a staff and a rod, the staff for the function of gathering and the rod for disciplining, that there are these kind of mutual elements that are embraced and shared by the shepherd. So why in a time of turmoil is the image of shepherd as important, perhaps more important in that sort of a context? So go ahead and use your comment feature and share that with us. Oh, I don't want to do that. Any thoughts or ideas? Because I think in a lot of ways, 2020 for us is one of these times of uncertainties. There's an awful lot of turmoil out there in the world. And when there is turmoil, it becomes even more important for us to remember that the Lord is our shepherd. So in what ways is the fact that the Lord is our shepherd, does that provide additional assurance and comfort as we're kind of going through the kinds of things we're going through? Jerry Cycle mentions to protect from the wolves lurking, waiting to pounce. Yeah, that there's a realization, Jerry, that as we recognize there are dangers out there, that it's especially good to know that there's a shepherd who is watching over us in the midst of those dangers. Jerry Bowers mentions that he knows where the quiet waters are. He can bring refreshing. So we may not know. There's an uncertainty in what tomorrow might bring. But the shepherd will certainly be able to provide for us in ways we cannot provide for ourselves. Doreen Blacker mentions the image of the shepherd is peaceful and denotes caring and direction. And so when we don't know where to go, we don't know what to do, that there is peace in being assured of the fact that there is, in God, there's that awareness. Yeah, Gay Colgrove mentions the importance of just companionship. To realize that when we go into these places where we are, say, in the language of Psalm 23, we're in the presence of our enemies or walking through the shadow of death, just simply to know that the shepherd goes with us. Eric Peterson mentions that we are more reliant on God in difficult times, that in these moments we need a shepherd. We've always needed a shepherd. We become more cognizantly aware of our need for a shepherd. Jerry Ford mentions knowing God is always there is comforting and his presence never leaves. And so we know, again, whatever we enter into, whatever we deal with, that we know that God's there with us. Melinda mentions because when the wolf's circling the herd, he can protect the herd. And so, there is this realization, because if I'm aware of, when I'm in an uncertain situation, I'm probably more aware of the dangers there. And so it's good for me to be aware of the God who can protect me from those dangers. Mitch King mentions what we eat, drink, and where we sleep. Those all become more pressing questions when there's uncertainty, right? Where's my next meal going to come from? I need water to sustain me. My body cannot function without sleep. Where's all this going to come from? And I can begin to wonder about all those things, and reminding myself that God is my shepherd is a realization that there is one still in control. Cindy Pavey mentions that shepherds lead the flock. They don't drive them. It's a huge comfort to know that the shepherd goes ahead of us. We know he's very aware of what we face and what we need. This shepherd, Cindy, is one that if he goes somewhere, we race to go where he goes, because we know all of these things come with his very presence. Todd Loomis mentions turmoil requires more direction, not less, more guidance, not less. It's in these times of turmoil. If I have a lake house, I'm not concerned about where my water is going to come from because there's a lake there. But say that lake dries up, now all of a sudden I need someone to guide me in those things in a more visceral or direct way. Tammy Loomis mentions knowing that someone can see a bigger picture and is in control of what we need. This comfort of realizing the perspective that we have might be limited, but that God's perspective of the situation is unlimited. Let's see here, 5:37. I'm just trying to decide whether I will skip a section here. There's a guy, and his name is really hard to pronounce. I think it's Alfred von Rohr-Sauer. Alfred von Rohr-Sauer. And he says, the poet, that being the David who wrote Psalm 23, is certain that God is with him at all stages of his pilgrimage. He is certain that God is with him at all stages of his pilgrimage. And that is a comfort as we think about this turmoil of 2020. I think that it is comforting to realize no matter where we go, no matter what we encounter, no matter what we face, God's there joining us on that pilgrimage. It's not, maybe that language isn't the best way to say it. It's not that God is joining us. We are there following God through this pilgrimage. So we may end up in situations we don't want to be in. We may end up in the valley of the shadow of death. We may end up in the presence of our enemies. But we can enter into them knowing that our shepherd God is there. The shepherd God, of course, who protects. The shepherd God who guides. The shepherd God who provides. The shepherd God who cares. The shepherd God who promises to be there. That it gives us this awareness as we enter into these situations, that we enter into them with God's very presence. I'm trying to think of Deuteronomy 31:8 It is the Lord who goes before you. He will be with you. He will not fail you or forsake you. Do not fear or be dismayed. In the biblical language, there's a lot of comfort in the fact simply that God is with us. And so we continue to remind us that God, our shepherd, the shepherd's not sleeping, 3 mountainsides over. Because he's our shepherd, he's there with the flock. And you can sleep knowing that somebody is watching guard. When there's not someone, it's really hard to sleep. I remember this would have been 1996. I was in Manila for 13 hours. There was a group of 4 of us who were there, and we had this long layover. Of course, we'd had a long flight overnight, and we were all exhausted. But there were people walking around the airport with these, AK-47. They were like legit machine guns. And that was a little disconcerting to the group of us. And so what we did was we slept in shifts. So we had all of our bags there. And so person A, you're going to watch for the next hour, and the others are going to sleep, and then we rotate. Because you're not going to fall asleep in a dangerous situation unless you know someone is watching. And God plays that providing role. He goes with us. And in the language of Psalm 84, God says, I will neither sleep nor slumber. The one who watches over Israel does not sleep or slumber. Doreen Blackner mentions, I think we need to determine ahead of troubles that we will react with faith in God's presence. There's this element of the unfolding nature of God. And so we prepare through this aspect of, well, the Lord is my shepherd. And as I encounter situations, I know that He will provide what is needed, and so that's going to be my guide through that. Jerry Bowers, Psalm 48:14. This God is our God forever and ever. He will be our guide even to the end. Great comment. Holly mentioning in reference to Doreen's statement is kind of like a fire drill. It makes us to be prepared, and that there is this importance of learning to lean on and to rely on God's provision. And 2020 has certainly given us that opportunity, hasn't it? If nothing else, it's been an invitation from our shepherd to say, can you walk alongside me, or are you going to be distracted by all of the things that you believe you're lacking, because life is fundamentally very different. To say that the Lord is my shepherd is to say that I am in the care of someone else. To say that the Lord is my shepherd is to say that I am in the care of someone else. And there should be a lot of comfort for us to realize that we find ourselves cared for, protected by another. Now, the other place we see this strong imagery of the shepherd, you have the wilderness wanderings, but you also are going to see it again in prophetic books, anticipating a time where God's shepherding God will come and more directly shepherd His people. So this comes out of Isaiah 40, verse 11. He will feed His flock like a shepherd. He will gather the lambs in His arms and carry them in His bosom, and gently lead the mother's sheep. Or Ezekiel 34:10. Thus says the Lord, I am against the shepherds, and I will demand my sheep at their hand, and put a stop to their feeding of the sheep. No longer shall the shepherds feed them. I will rescue my sheep from their mouths, so that they may not be food for them. So there have been, in the human experience of shepherding, there have been not very good shepherds. That's Ezekiel 34 is about the leaders who are not shepherding well. And God is saying, I will take back my job of shepherding because my under shepherds are not caring for the flock as they should. Now, I think that we're probably all well enough versed in the Bible to know who is this shepherd of which God speaks. And we find, as Jerry Cycle had mentioned earlier, John 10, Jesus calls Himself, says, I am the good shepherd, which means this looking forward to. So even the shepherd relationship David had with God, there is in many ways an even more intimate shepherding relationship that we have with Jesus. And so this notion of Jesus says that he calls his sheep know him by name. He knows his sheep by name. They recognize his voice. And so as we think about the Lord being my shepherd as New Testament Christians, we recognize that Jesus plays a role in that shepherding. And that there can be tremendous comfort in that calling and in that aspect. Now, so first part, the Lord is my shepherd, so I will not lack. So why ought we not to experience lack in light of the fact that he is our shepherd? So if God is our shepherd, why should we not experience lack or emptiness or this, sense that we need to go out shopping to get something else to fulfill some void that we're still experiencing? How does God's presence address this lack? Why does the fact that God is our shepherd in any way address our experience of lack? So go ahead and use your comment feature and just share why you believe that the fact that God is our shepherd should impact this, here it is, this excessive lack that we experience. So in what ways is the fact that God's my shepherd, how does God being a shepherd address this piece of my life that I can experience excessive lack? I can get on Facebook and say, well, I'm not fast enough, or I'm not pretty enough, or I'm not strong enough, or I'm not healthy enough, or I'm not rich enough, or I'm not nice enough, or I'm not any of these sort of things. How does the fact that God is my shepherd, how does that address my experience of lacking something? So go ahead and use your comment features, and we'll see if anybody's got any thoughts on that. Doreen Blackner mentions that he provides our needs, but not always our wants. And so, yeah, there's an irony in this, which is when we believe that he provides our needs, that actually influences our wants. So I may want something, but if God's giving me what I need, it will subsequently address even that want that I'm experiencing. Brian asks the question, is this a statement of fact from David? Oh, it just disappeared. No lacking, or is it a statement that David wishes to attain? And yeah, Brian, that's a good question. It's an interesting observation, because you will see times where David will push God to do something, or he will point God's attention to the fact that this is not in my life right now, this is not missing. And so I think it would be fair to say that what we are talking about is some sort of an ideal form of discipleship, that this is what we are to reach for and to attain, not necessarily that David is saying, hey, this is my constant experience of every moment of my life. That's my thoughts. If anyone else has a thought on that, go ahead and use the comment feature. Cindy Pavitt says, yeah, that he gives us everything I need. So if God is playing this role of protector and of providing and of guiding and of caring, then I know that he's giving me what is needed, and it's going to address that there. Jerry Bowers, the health of the sheep depends on the good shepherd's guiding, feeding, watering, etc. Yeah, that my experience of life is, if I have this trust in the shepherd, I may even relook at what I think I need. I may even relook at what I believe is necessary, because if he says I have what is necessary, then can I trust him in that? Gay mentions gratitude for what we have reduces longing for what we don't. Yeah, that we can direct our attention, I think, in either one of two ways. We can either direct our attention towards, here's everything that's missing in my life, here's everything that I don't have, or we can direct our attention to, here's everything that I do have. And you might say, you know what, Craig, there's not a lot going on in my life that I can point to of good things that I do have. And the biblical answer to that is, you have the Lord as your shepherd. If you have that one item on your list, it's satisfactory to have that piece or that element there. Jerry Cycle, we should experience complete confidence and be content no matter the circumstances with God's guidance, having a close relationship with him. That this is a part of what we're being called into, this expression of faith. Eric Peterson says that he shares our burdens. Jesus says, "Come to me, for my yoke is easy and my burden is light." That those things that we are burdened with, that Jesus, as the Good Shepherd, he wants to take the sheep up in his hand, and he wants to carry them and to care for them. And so in many ways, I think what we're doing through this first line of Psalm 23 is we're calling us upward. We're calling us to a faith that is probably stronger than the faith we have. It's probably a more idealized version of the faith we have, but it's something that we're called to live into this kind of reality. Specifically, the first line of Psalm 23:1 is what I recite to myself as I go to sleep every night. At the end of a day, there may be things that I wished I had got done. There may have been things that I wish had happened, all of these sort of things. But at the end of the day, I want to end my day with this peace and the assurance that I don't lack anything. I can sleep knowing that whatever is needed and whatever is necessary is what God has provided. And so it's learning, I think what our learning lesson is learning to trust in that shepherd. So I want to tell a story that I think kind of illustrates this. So for this story to make sense, you have to be familiar with the flying trapeze act. So I'll kind of explain it a little bit, because I don't know if I've ever seen it in real life, but I think I have a pretty good concept. You have these two people, right? And they're on these big long swings. Typically, they've got their knees kind of hooked around. Well, one person has their knees hooked around, their hands down. The other person, their hands in, they're swinging. And then eventually, one person lets go. That person is called the flyer, and they fly over to the other person who's on that swing thing, and the other person catches them. Okay. So a guy named Henry Nouwen, he tells the story of meeting the flying rodellas. They are trapeze people who were a part of a German circus. Got to have dinner with the troupe, and so as they're having dinner, they're talking about this flying trapeze act. And the leader, who is Rodea, he says, this is how it works. He says, "As a flyer, I must have complete trust in my catcher. The public may think that I am the great star of the trapeze, but the real star is Joe, my catcher. He has to be there for me with split-second precision and grab me out of the air as I come to him in the long jump." Nouwen asks, so how does it work? The secret, Rodea says, is that the flyer does nothing and the catcher does everything. When I fly to Joe, I have simply to stretch out my arms and my hands and wait for him to catch me and to pull me to safety over the apron behind the catch bar. Nouwen says, so you do nothing? Rodea repeats, nothing. The worst thing a flyer can do is try and catch the catcher. I'm not supposed to catch Joe. It's Joe's task to catch me. If I grab Joe's wrists, I might break them, or he might break mine, and that would be the end for both of us. A flyer must fly, and a catcher must catch. And the flyer must trust with outstretched arms that the catcher will be there for him. So the question becomes, in Psalm 23, who is the flyer and who is the catcher? The Lord is my shepherd. And in that statement, what God is saying is, I am the catcher. Your job is simply to trust me to do what I've promised to do. I have promised to offer you the protection. I've promised to provide for you. I've promised to give you guidance. I've promised to give you care. Do you trust me? And I envision a lot of us being like the flyer who is just not quite sure they're going to get caught. And maybe I'm going to help them out. I'm going to flail a little bit, or I'm going to reach a little bit, or I'm going to do any of these sort of things, which in this example, they're saying, if you do anything other than just outstretch your arms, you're going to mess things up for both of you. And so I wonder what it looks like for us to live that kind of life with that kind of faith in our good shepherd. To trust that in a year like 2020, when there's so much turmoil around us, to trust that he indeed can and will catch us. And it's not about a blanket statement. It's about, as we talked about last week, it's about embodied trust. Living with that sense of confidence and assurance, knowing that he will indeed catch us and trust us. Jerry Bowers mentions, he says that he walks with us constantly. We are never alone, and this is where peace comes from. What else do we need? That there is this reminder in this sense that God is doing what God said he would do. And can we learn to trust him in that? I'm going to give you an activity to consider practicing once, twice, as many times as you want this week. It's something called the breath prayer. And here's how a breath prayer works. With a breath prayer, you just focus on your breath, and as you breathe in, you repeat something, and as you breathe out, you repeat something different. So in the context of Psalm 23 coming out of the NIV, it's taking a minute out of your day, it's taking 2 minutes out of your day, and every time you breathe in, you're saying this to yourself: the Lord is my shepherd. And as you breathe out, I lack nothing. As you breathe in, the Lord is my shepherd. And as you breathe out, I lack nothing. And it's just repeating that phrase, because what it is doing, it is solidifying in our hearts, in our minds, in our bodies. It's solidifying the fact that God is indeed my shepherd. And all these things that I'm carrying, I can entrust to him. Brian Lair mentions we need to remember that the way God catches us might be different than the way he catches our brother. If that's not the case, Brian, we're going to end up with that same problem that we have with social media, right? Which is, God's obviously using a really, really big trampoline for Brian because he's caught him in this very luxurious way. And for me, he caught me by having me land on a slab of grass, and it wasn't the most comfortable thing. I survived, but hey, I'd rather land on something softer. That our attention in this is directed towards the shepherd. It's not directed towards comparing the outcome we have with the other sheep. Jerry Bowers mentions this language of my shepherd, that I belong to him, that there is this corporateness to God, but there is also this very personal element to God, that we recognize God is not just a shepherd. He's not just the shepherd, but as a believer, God functions also as my shepherd. So we'll go ahead and close here with a prayer, and then following the prayer, if anybody has any things they want to share, anything coming up this week or prayers, we can do that. But let's just take a moment and pray together. Lord God, we know that you are our shepherd, and as a result, we lack nothing. We ask, Father, for your forgiveness in times when we have lists and lists of things that we're lacking. We get online, we go to the mall, we say that we need to get all of these things. We're constantly shopping to fill and satisfy something that we know can only be filled and satisfied by you. Teach us what it means to be content in your shepherding, to fully trust you. I pray, Lord, this week may be an exercise in trust, that in the midst of turmoil and in the midst of uncertainty, we would learn to trust you more. Bless us in this, that your name might be great and that we might greatly praise you. And it is in Jesus' name that we pray. Amen. Well, I appreciate everyone joining us and being a part of the class tonight. Any announcements, activities, things that you want to share? I'm assuming that most people are up to date with this, but we did have a funeral on Thursday for Margaret Patton, and I think we honored a godly life in that, and but we do need to be continuing to pray for the Patton family. Also, Claude Henson passed away this last week on Tuesday, and so we do want to be remembering the Henson and the King family. Right now, there's no services planned for that, but maybe send an encouragement, take some time praying for the family, but we want to keep them in our hearts and minds as well. Question about my when my parents moved, let's see, Lori Peterson is asking for my parents' address, and probably a good son would be able to dictate that. But since they moved, since I live there, I don't remember it anymore. Okay, my parents' address is, okay, why does that keep disappearing? 712 Melrose Street, Melrose, and that's Kingston, like King, Ston, Ontario, K7M9B6. And let's see, Lori, we'll make sure we get you that. Also, look at me, I'm multitasking here. There. I also sent you oh, Jerry Ford says I'll message you. See, I should have been looking at this and not focusing on getting that done because Jerry already had it taken care of. Jeff and Rhonda, thanks for joining us. I'm glad to have you guys here with us. Jerry, I'm glad to have you as well. Anybody have anything exciting or interesting coming up this week? I guess we are T-minus 2 weeks until Thanksgiving. So I'm sure that's on people's minds right now. What is happening in the exciting in life of the Fords? I don't think anything is interesting happening with us. Jerry, you can post there if I'm missing some exciting activity that's coming up on our calendars. One of the cool things from last week, we did get to babysit Luke. I don't know, Dagan, I think is how Lyle likes to say it. And boy, that guy is just a little cutie. Almost makes me think we should have 4 kids. And yeah, so if the Degans ever ask for you to babysit, say yes, because Luke is the most delightful little guy. So that's pretty cool. Brian Lair is heading out hunting tomorrow, and he wants to fill his freezer. And so we'll see if Brian comes back, he can gratefully pray, or he can repeat the phrase that God, his shepherd, has provided everything. But if he comes back without that, he may wonder why God isn't giving him everything he needs. So yeah, we need to be praying for good results with that. Yeah, we got Richard and Leanne who are on the class tonight. Richard is Margaret's son, and so kind of a cool thing to have you guys here joining us on Facebook, and it was good to have you guys here in Billings with us as well. Jerry is asking for prayers for her daughter Larissa and her husband Chuck. Safe travels to Missoula. They're going to head out tomorrow and back on Wednesday. So yeah, praying for safety for Larissa and Chuck. And looks like the weather should be pretty good. So I think that will work out, and that is indeed a blessing there for that. Let's see, what else is happening or going on? Thinking of things probably overlooking. On Facebook, so it should be public information. Rod and Landy's son Aiden is engaged to Kendra, and so we're excited for them. Pray and wish them all the best as they get set to enter into this great journey of marriage. Well, thank you. Yeah, as you think about the Pattons, it's good to reach out to them and to let them know. We do want to be an encouragement to them at this time. Well, unless there's anything else anybody wants to share, I'm getting ready to close this group down. Now, as I say that, I think, okay, now I have to fill at least 15 seconds because that's usually how long of a delay it makes for comments to get here. But we are thankful for everyone joining us tonight. Kind of weird, I'm looking out the window and I'm seeing it's dark out there. And it's a strange experience for it to be 6 o'clock and dark, but it's only going to get worse from here. I hate to say it, it's only going to get worse from here. Well, everyone, have a blessed week. Just remember that the Lord is indeed your shepherd, and because of that, there is nothing you lack. God bless. Have a wonderful week. We'll see you guys later.